Hi, I'm Roby, and this is the second video about making exhibitions. In a series of 8 videos, I'll deal with some aspects that an exhibitor can encounter in practice. However, most of the material about making exhibition can be found on our Patreon site. All proceeds from Patreon go towards developing educational programs to our Art for Children gallery. In this video, I will start with the copyrights. The principle of copyright is actually quite simple, but of course, you can make everything as complicated as you want, and they have been doing that for some time. The most important, however, is that as a creator, you own what you make and no one else is allowed to make changes to that work. This right is called droit moral, the moral right, and it's not transferable. That is a very important principle. Also regulated internationally in the 1928 by Berne Convention for the protection of literary and artistic work. And since then, many books have appeared on what this right actually means. But the principle is still the same, only the creator has a right to do what he or she wants with the work. And that right can never be passed on as long as the creator lives. But now you have made work and you might want to generate some income from it. That's possible. You can sell the work itself or you can exploit the work commercially. Let's start with the selling. Whoever buys a work of art owns that artwork physically. But that does not include the right to generate commercial income from it. And neither it includes the moral right. So although one owns the work physically, one still may not change anything on it because that is the moral right of the maker. And the consequence of this is that the buyer is obliged to keep the work in good condition. If there's accidentally damage to the work, the creator is also entitled to compensation. For example, if you have bought a vase and somebody breaks it, you are entitled to get the money back that you paid for the artwork. But the creator must also be compensated because now the original work doesn't exist anymore. It can be on an exhibition or in a museum, and it can no longer be used commercially. It's gone. So let's talk about the commercially use, the economic exploitation. This can be done in all possible ways. It can be photographed, printed or used for a video or a movie. People who are interested can buy the rights or certain rights to do business with. Without those rights, it's not allowed to make use of the work in any way. Although there are exceptions called fair use, such as when the work is used for education. So sometimes it may be used even without permission, but then they still have to pay a fee. And lucky, in some cases, the maker can rightly refuse to allow his work to be used, even if it is for educational purposes. For example, when a political party wants to use the work in an educational video, while the creator completely disagrees with that party's vision, then the maker can invoke his moral rights and state that the way in which the work is used and the context in which it's presented influence how people judge the work. Only the creator can say whether the presentation conflicts with the intention from which the artwork was created. Leaves the question, how do you prove you are the creator? Well, there are agencies that earn money with this because every country has its own rules. Fortunately, there is a fairly inexpensive way to ensure that you can prove when exactly you made something. Besides a newspaper article, one can make a very good description of the work, send it with the pictures to the tax authority, asking whether you have to pay VAT or tax or whatever on it. You will get an answer, and that is an excellent time evidence, especially since the tax authorities keep this type of correspondence very long and it's for free. However, the fact that you made the artwork doesn't make you the creator. For example, When you work as an employee, then your employer is regarded as the creator. And it is the employer who has the moral rights and can bring the products to the market and hopes to recoup the development costs and, of course, your salary. Because copyrights often deal with a lot of money, it can be all very complicated. How complicated it can be, I would like to show you with an example that happened to me. In 1986, I organized a project on the design of our living environment called The Inside of the Outside and the Outside of the Inside. The project had 7 parts, each consisting of 2 contrasting activities. For example, there was an activity in which, on the one hand, we had students who visualized their way to school. Their world is constantly expanding. The contrasting activity was the room of elderly people because their world is constantly shrinking, ending up captured in some pictures on the wall. For the description of the entire project, I would like to refer to our Patreon site. In this video, I only want to talk about one of the activities that caused a copyright problem. The activity was about a completely different use of a road. On the one hand, we have the labyrinth where the road leads to nowhere, and on the other hand, the highway where we drive as fast as possible from one point to another. And as a former Beatle George Harrison sings so lovely, when you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. I'm sorry. Always when I talk about the roads, this song comes up in my mind. But it's from 1988, 2 years after my project. So for the highway, I had to make up something myself. I came up with the following. When you leave a city and you see a sign with the name on the city and a line through it because you are leaving that city, and then when you arrive at the next city, you will see a sign with the name of the new city. So when you leave one city, you are still completely in the first city. But the further you drive, the less you are in that city and the more you are in the next city. And I wanted to express that process in a number of artworks along the highway. Now I had seen a painting of Joshua, a Dutch artist, on which an object fell apart into pieces. Then it occurred to me that if he does a series of works, start with one where the name of the first city breaks up into pieces, then those pieces should float around in the following paintings, finally coming together in the last painting and then forming the name of the new city. The idea really appealed to him and he started to make the designs for the paintings. Unfortunately, major disagreements arose on 2 important points. The first problem was about how the artworks will be presented along the road. The government was willing to give us wooden billboards for free, and they could place them along the highway also for us. But Joshua did not agree. He wanted big metal boards. Making and installing them would cost over 10,000 euro each, and we needed 10 of them. So I stated that if he could get money, I was fine with it. But I argued that we could go for the free version, and once realized it will be much easier to find a sponsor for the metal version. But he insisted that he did not want to present his work on those wooden boards. The second problem was about copyright. He stated that he owned the copyright and that I always had to ask permission and pay him a fee before using images of the paintings. I stated that the idea for the series was mine and that the series were part of an overall project devised by me. The concept that was based for his painting was mine. He only had worked out the idea. From a copyright point of view, this is a very complex situation. For me, he could have all the rights to the individual works, but I wanted to be able to make a documentary and a book about the project, among other things. We did agree with the other participants that the possible income and sponsorship money were divided equally among all participants, but he wanted to get an extra fee for showing his paintings. Well, the two disagreements were a reason for me to cancel his part of the project, and I thought, just let's go to the next topic. That is about contracts. For example, something that seems very logical cannot be an argument in a conflict. There was a time when I rented out hundreds of small exhibitions with works of children's books illustrators, mostly to regional libraries. I then rented out to a group of 8 libraries 8 exhibitions, which then circulate in those libraries for 8 months. Practically, our central library rented the exhibition and paid me. The costs were €5 per exhibition per month. In this case, 8 by 5 by 8 is €320. That central library only paid €40 because they said, well, I had written that the exhibitions were €5 each. I hadn't paid any attention to that because Art Lending always calculates the price per month, and in that library there was also an Art Lending, and there people pay a minimum of €5 per month for a single work of art. Thus it seemed quite absurd to me to assume that the rent was only €5 per exhibition for 8 months. The case went to court because I wanted €280 more, but I was ruled against. I should have clearly stated in was per month. The library had paid me €40 and wanted that money back because they had sent the exhibition back after my complaint. The judge ruled that I had supplied the exhibitions and that they had sent them back on their own initiative, so their claim was unjustified. The bottom line was that we were both unsuccessful and both had to pay our attorney fees. Well, since I had done it myself, that was not a big problem for me. But in essence, it means that you do not derive any rights from what you can reasonably expect. So always state clearly in your contract what you think that everybody already knows. It's good to put it on paper, then it's black and white and no discussions about it. Those who do business internationally, and somehow most of us does, will soon discover the consequence of cultural differences. That was the case in the very past, and it still is. The discovery of America by Columbus in 1492 is an example of this. His maps were based on Persian geography, so he should have used the Arab mile as a unit. But he calculated with a Roman mile, which is different. That is why he accidentally discovers America. This mistake went well, at least for Columbus. But for the Mars climate orbiter, it went really dramatic in 1999, when it turned out that the engineers hadn't thought of converting the measurements from English to metric, with a big explosion as a result. Another well-known problem is that what is black and white on paper can be judged from very different cultures in a very different way. In some cultures, the law is the most important thing. Being able to count on the law when, for example, you are wrong, it's of great importance because it is the legislation that ensures the smoothly running society. In other cultures, it is the family that is the most important. Being able to count on the family in all circumstances is vital. This difference is a vision manifests itself in all kinds of areas. Like when we look at the time aspect. In most Western cultures, there is what is called a sequential view. Things come one after the other, and so one has to stick to a strict time schedule. On the other hand, we have synchronous conception of time. So much happens at the same time, past, present and future are constantly omnipresent. It's a famous Buddhist saying that when you are standing in front of a river, the river is not only what you see, but also the water that has passed and the water that still has to come. On the way to an important appointment, it's always possible that one suddenly runs into an old friend And in a culture where family relationships are extremely important, people will take the time to greet that old friend and possibly have a cup of tea together, while the others are waiting to start with a very important meeting. We also see this aspect reflected in how people distinguish between work and private life. In a clearly structured society, there is also a clear difference between the business and the personal. In a culture where there's no such distinction, people react very differently to contracts. Then a contract is often seen as something for when one does not trust the other. It took myself a while to understand the problem with that point of view. Until the other day, after visiting artists, I drove home with my car full of beautiful work. And on the way there was an accident that luckily I was not really involved in. Although I realized that if I had been in the car before me, the artwork in my car would have completely destroyed. And not only the artwork. How could the artist later prove that it was her work? From that day on, I started making forms. Usually the artists are saying that they trusted me and so we didn't need to do that paperwork. But when I say that it was given the work to me because they trust me, those papers were there in case something happened to me or to the work. Insurance do not pay out based on trust, but on what is on paper. In a culture where the distinction between the personal and the business is small, people often identify themselves with the business. Criticism of a business aspect is then seen as criticism of the person themselves. Language can therefore be enormous help in negotiation between different cultures. The English had many colonies and therefore a lot of experience with cultural difference. They were very aware of the phenomenon of losing face, a very important cultural aspect in Asia. During a meeting, when they find your suggestion really very bad, the British will still enthusiastically argue, well, very, very interesting. In the Vietnamese language, we can make a sentence interrogative by simply adding at the end, phai không, meaning yes, no. So you can respond with yes or no depending on what suits you the best. Vietnamese often start to answer with yes, yes, very positive. Is your shop open? Yes, 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 we are closed. In fact, with the first yes, they mainly want to indicate that they have understood the question. But a good example of how to deal with the same problem in different cultures is how I solved the transportation and custom problems of our meeting point exhibition in Ho Chi Minh City at that time. In Europe, transporting exhibition material from one country to another has become extremely easy. Transport from or to outside Europe is generally not. Anyone who takes works in a suitcase to exhibit somewhere very locally will generally have no problem. In Romania, it's a risk, but as a tourist I've been taking unframed work for exhibitions to dozens of countries without any problem. However, it's different when you have an official exhibition in a renowned museum, and that was the situation for our meeting point exhibition in 2014 at the Ho Chi Minh City Fine Art Museum, which is the largest art museum in Vietnam. Work that is exhibited there must first be approved by a commission, and this is mainly a lot of administrative work. Each work must be described exactly, and there must be also extensive information about the artist. In our case, I had dozens of participants, and it was a load of information that had to be submitted well in advance to get approval on time. For Vietnam, you need that approval from the commission before you can get an approval from the customs to import the work. Our Dutch transporter had arranged a Vietnamese freight forwarder to bring the work to the customs and later to the museum. However, only 4 days before the exhibition was due to open, the owner of the company called the museum and told them there were major problems and that it would take at least 3 weeks before the work could be released from the custom. Fortunately, this could be prevented, but it would cost extra money. Some panic at the museum and at the Dutch consulate. They proposed to pay or to postpone the exhibition, but in my view the problem was not with the customs, but with that office. So I suggested that we stuck to the opening a few days later on Sundays. The museum informed the office, and it didn't take long before the director showed up. He made it very clear to me once again that those artworks could really not be released unless I had to pay a lot of extra. Well, how did I solve this? Well, I don't let myself be blackmailed just before the opening of an exhibition. The work was already a month in Vietnam, so there had been a lot of time to solve any problem. They just had waited too long before starting to do the job. I could have told him that I would go to court and because of the situation, because we had a contract, but that would take maybe years for it to appear in court, so that was no option. Lucky I was aware of the power of losing face. So I told him that if I didn't have the works on time, there will be a lot of open spaces at the exhibition. Spaces where normally the artwork should hang. Instead of the artwork, I will hang a paper on which was written that his office, against all agreements, had not brought the works in time. We knew national television was coming along, all the other media, so I told him it was going to be great publicity for his office. 2 hours later, I had all the work in the museum, and as you can see on this Vietnamese news program.
Tác phẩm do Tổng lãnh sự quán Vương quốc Hà Lan phối hợp tổ chức. Các thể loại bao gồm tranh trừu tượng, nghệ thuật sắp đặt, tạo hình. Mục đích giới thiệu các phong cách nghệ thuật đương đại từ xứ sở qua tulip với công chúng yêu mỹ thuật thành phố. Đây là lần đầu tiên phía Hà Lan tổ chức buổi triển lãm theo mô típ này tại thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. Ý tưởng là giới thiệu phong cách nghệ thuật châu Âu ngày nay được thể hiện như thế nào, đặc biệt là ở Hà Lan. Điểm độc đáo của triển lãm là các bức tranh đều không được đặt tên. Với thông điệp mỗi cảm nhận là một nghệ thuật, khách tham quan sẽ tự cảm nhận và tìm hiểu thông tin về tác phẩm qua việc trao đổi trực tiếp với những người tổ chức. Phương pháp giúp công chúng cảm nhận và khám phá nghệ thuật theo tư duy của riêng mình mà không bị gò bó bởi tên đề tài. Mỗi loại hình nghệ thuật đều có một sự kỳ diệu riêng, giúp bạn có thêm những ý tưởng mới.
Back to the Netherlands, we had a follow-up problem. Now the Dutch carrier suddenly wanted thousands of euros extra because they had received the EU bill from the Vietnamese forwarder, because a lot of extra costs due to the customs problems in Vietnam. And they refused to return the works of art. I had to pay first. A number of artists were willing to pay that extra money, but I wasn't. It took me some effort to find out what had gone wrong, but actually it was a very simple thing. We carried, so to speak, 100 works of art, and they were allowed to be imported. There was a document given by the special commissioner which showed that we had permission to import these 100 artworks. The thing was that a few artworks were in multiple package, so the custom counted more package as there were artworks on the list. The Dutch carrier should therefore have issued a freight warner to the customs, stating that some works were packed in multiple units. They should have made a second list for the customs, but they hadn't. And the Vietnamese office would have discovered this when they had checked the packets at arriving in Vietnam, and they also hadn't done that. So I demanded immediate return to the works and the cancellation of the extra costs. If they didn't do, I would file a lawsuit. In the Netherlands, that will take me a lot of time. Wouldn't take me a lot of time. Oh, it's going much faster, yeah. But they wisely consulted a lawyer and the problem was solved. Well, it resulted in another page in the newspaper, and that was very nice for the participating artists because it was reason for many regional media to interview them about. So finally, a few words about agreements. Due to the lack of understanding of different cultures, many unjustified prejudices arise. A typical example is that certain cultures are considered not trustworthy, while in many cases they are just trying to please you. For example, when you're on your way to an appointment and you need to know how far it is, in a very functional cultures, you will be told, oh, it's 30 kilometers, or maybe 20 minutes. A very concrete answer. In other cultures, the answer depends on how people assess the question. If they see that you're enjoying the journey, well, they will say, oh, it will take, still a while before we are there. If you look very tired, they will say, oh, we will be there in no time. They give the answer they think you like the best, and there's not always a connection with factual things. That's how their culture works the best. As I mentioned, losing face is of enormous importance in Asian cultures, but it also plays a role in other cultures. When you ask someone to do something, it will not be a problem if it is a standard activity, but it will be different if it is a special activity. To the question, can you do this for me before next Friday? You will often get an affirmative answer because they want to satisfy you. Then a week later, it turns out it hasn't been done yet. An important reason might be that people did not start to work on it because they are afraid that they will do not in time. That will mean you lost a face. So it's better not to start with it. The point is that the question, can you do this for me before next Friday, can be considered as a hypothetical question. They could have done it if they started it, but so much had intervened. So my own solution is to ask the question different. I start by introducing my problem, knowing that they will look for a solution based on their helpfulness. Next, I suggest sometimes difficult, asking for something impossible. I will tell them, I know it's impossible to get this done before next Friday, but if a little can be done about it, that will be so great. This avoids the problem of losing face by not having done the job on time. Almost always they will have done it for me on time because they could not lose face by not doing the job on time. They would lose face by not trying to help me, and that's a different thing. So that's it for now. Thank you for watching. See you on Patreon or in the next video, which will be about the concept of an exhibition. And I hope my throat will be a little bit better then. Xin chào. Well, it's tạm biệt. Or hẹn gặp lại. I should have studied Vietnamese.